Wow, it is cold again here. It's down below freezing, which not unusual for this time of year, but it was like 70 degrees over the weekend, so I'm getting a bit of meteorological whiplash. Anyway, today, uh, continuing the series of videos talking about principles of practice. Right, so on Monday, I talked about the sort of principal aspiration, which is the understanding of the self, the recognition of the mystery, and the ever broadening intersection between the two. Right? And then yesterday, talked about the necessity for wisdom, the necessity for a wise populace. And I got off on a bit of a tangent there about um, my bafflement at the sort of the state of affairs we find ourselves in, where we really are in a golden age of information in terms of practice and teaching and our ability to communicate. Excuse me. Dropped my phone. Um, Again, a better YouTuber would edit that out. Um, and yet, even with all of that information available and the uh, truly remarkable availability of teachers, I am baffled that we do not have global institutions whose purpose is to direct, share, federate the project of enlightenment on a global scale. It just seems like we're missing a trick there, right? We have this capability, this potential, and the opposite seems to be happening. All right, so that's neither here nor there. That's a tangent, although it is something I'm thinking a lot about. Today, the third principle is the ongoing nature of revelation. Right, revelation continues. So, what do I mean by that? Well, a couple of things. First, kind of the obvious one is, in Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, we tend to look back on the sacred texts, the scriptures, as ancient, because they are. They're written thousands of years ago, and that anything that we've written today cannot have the same weight. So the first point of this principle is simply that the possibility, in fact, the likelihood of valuable prophecy, revelation, practice approach is quite available to us today. That the great teachers and lineage holders, or independent prophets and voices, that the access point to the underlying mystery that we talked about in Principle 1, that access point is as alive and vital today as it was in biblical times, or in the 800s, when many of the texts that we study in the Bon tradition were written down for the first time. The studies and disquisitions, expositions on these texts today are just as likely to be really ecstatic revelation as anything that's happened in the past. But set that aside, because the other part of this principle is that the revelatory aspect of the practice, not only are those sacred texts potentially updatable today, but our experience of it, our personal experience, is absolutely immediate and present. That we don't need an intermediary. revelation is present and ongoing and participatory. And I think I would go so far as to say that that is true whether we are conscious of that fact or not. Right? That we are all, as humans, engaged in that process of revelation. And the extent to which we practice is really more just the extent to which we verbalize and articulate the process that's happening within every single human being. So there's definitely a universalist aspect to my thinking on this. Revelation and the concomitant enlightenment that comes with it is necessarily available to every single human being. I've told a story or it's a thought experiment before. I'll tell it again here. I'm not, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I think in many ways he's a terrible president. Some of you might profoundly disagree with me on those statements. I think he's a corrupt and suffering human being. And I think that if he came over to my house and spent a Saturday afternoon sitting, listening to the music that I've written, it's on my Bandcamp site, I'll put a link in the show notes, sort of quietly talking through some stuff, I have this fantasy that he would recognize the obscurations in his karma and decide not to be president anymore. That process is what we're all trying to do in our practice, and it's based on the assumption that we are significantly overlapped in our actual underlying capacity, and what is distinct for each individual is the level of confusion or inexperience or obscurations, karmic obscurations, if you want to think of it that way, filters that can be cleaned through practice and study and dialogue, conversation. When I say the third principle, revelation is continuing, it means, again, not just the availability of new scripture, but also the absolute imperative for each and every one of us to be able to articulate the practice that's unfolding within us. So the work that I do on this channel, in my art, in my music, I do think of that work. I consider that work effective to the degree that it participates in that process, perhaps catalyzes that process. Right? When I write electronic music on my, it is different for me when I write electronic music as opposed to when I write piano music, although those two are converging. When I write electronic music, I am trying to create a liturgical experience, one that recreates and shares the sensations and phenomena that I associate with that boundarylessness of the ongoing revelation. Right? And I say that's the measure of my craft. And again, the degree to which I'm successful or not is the degree to which my craft is appropriate to the task or not. The reason that my piano music, I'm pointing over there because my working piano is over there, and I'm pointing over here because my Euro rack is over there. The reason that I think of them differently, I'm coming to realize, is that I'm just my craft is higher in the Euro rack than it is as a composer of the piano. And having recognized that, I'm now working on my sort of piano acoustic compositions with that same, like not accepting garbage, which I've done habitually on the piano and said, well, it's, it's intimate or it's colloquial, but I want the two to converge. So things like Prismatheon, which is the project involving clouds of prismatic mirrors in the atmosphere that solve for some of the extremes of climate change, but also participate in creating an aesthetic experience, right? So that project, as a thought experiment, is there to trigger the recognition that our interaction with the landscape can be profoundly different than what it is today, and that also resonates with our participation with the process of the practice, and that practice is by design and without challenge, non-categorically, there's an imperative to the practice that it is available to everyone, and not just available, but occurring. So our practice is to recognize the process that is already unfolding by the very nature of our birth and manifestation on the planet.